Let's go, Andy. So Human Nature is, it's a rare organisation in terms of some of the work you do for young people in terms of healing and giving them a better future. In your own words, tell us about Human Nature. You're the founder and you saw a real need there.
Thank you, Caroline. I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for...
Can everybody hear him?
Yeah. Working okay, for sticking it out this long and particularly for those who are invested in future generation and supporting the work of charities like myself. We are a youth mental health charity, but as you can tell, these guys put a lot of thought and expertise into the investments they make, and I guess my career has been dedicated very strongly to social investment and social change. And I started out as a psychologist and also majored in political science, very much interested in how we can fix some of the big social issues of our time. And whilst we work specifically with young people with mental health challenges, I started my career in adult mental health, in psychiatric facilities, in justice, criminal justice systems, drug and alcohol, and also domestic violence. And I've thought long and hard about these issues and how we actually make a lasting impact on these massive social problems that we're facing. And my career has honed more and more into working with this group of early adolescents, and particularly a targeted group of early adolescents where they've experienced extreme amounts of trauma and disadvantage, and they, I suppose, jumping back, the adults that I worked with, every single person I worked with, when I dug a little bit below the surface, had a strong history of childhood trauma, and they hadn't received the support they needed, and often they were highly disengaged at that point in their adolescence. And this stage of life is a stage where someone's life trajectory can be either determined by what's happened to them in their life or by what they do with what's happened to them. And if they can get the support they need at that point, you can make a drastic difference on that trajectory. And working with young people in the sector, I found that those who are most likely to end up in the worst scenarios, are most likely to end up in the juvenile justice system, in the adult prison system, in our psychiatric care facilities, in rehabs and drug and alcohol, or worse, and we have extremely high rates of suicide as well, are the least likely to engage in conventional mental health approaches. So essentially what we do is we have a team of mental health professionals who work outside of a clinical setting. We use nature and adventure to engage young people who would not walk through the door of a private psychologist, who would many times not even walk through the door of a Headspace Centre, which is our national mental health services, because it's still a psychologist sitting in a room. These kids are completely disengaged. And perhaps if I can just indulge in a little story of a young person who I was thinking about this morning. Let's call him Dave, who came into our service about a year ago. He was 14. His mum had died of a drug overdose when he was 12, I believe. And he was living with his dad and his 8-year-old sister. His dad had also had a really strong history of addiction, had been all through the foster care system, many, many different placements, had a lot of trauma. But he was trying, he was really working hard to support his son and his daughter after his partner's death. And this young man was basically on the streets, completely dropped out of school, smoking weed all day, and going down a slippery slope where he's getting more and more into a bad crowd, starting to get in trouble with the police. The school he was enrolled in but wasn't attending had tried to offer him all sorts of support, had tried to get him to see the school counsellor and others, and he just was not interested in that. He was basically, excuse my language, but he was in a fuck the world place and needed to be brought back from there. So we had one of our social workers start to engage him, found out he had a vague interest in fishing. So what does he do? He puts out the fishing lure and sees if he might like to go fishing, and managed to get him to do that. And probably over 6 months, got him so that he was committed every week to sitting there and fish with this young person on the banks of a river. Got him to, at least for that period of time, agree to be sober while they were talking. And over time, really start to make a shift in his life. It wasn't enough because his addiction was so strong. And so what we were able to do then was to get him on one of our expedition programs. So I led that program. It was a 5-day coastal hike. and a much more intensive opportunity for support. So we've got psychologists, clinical psychologists and social workers. We're working with a group of 10 to 12 young people out there in nature. And these are, as I said, highly targeted young people who are, without that support, can end up in a really, really bad place. And just to share one moment with that young person where he found on that walk, very similar to the one you see in the picture here, a heart-shaped rock on the ground, and he was immediately drawn to that rock and felt like it was a message from his mum, and opened him up to talking about all that grief he'd been holding for all those years, and through that process actually agreed to participate in a rehab program. His dad at that point had kicked him out of home and he was couch surfing, so his dad said he can't come back, so we had to find accommodation for him for a couple of days, got him straight into rehab, and he did 3 months of rehab and was successful in that process. And is now doing very well with us.
So I love that story. But what for me, what we do is when we fund not-for-profits. Basically, we're allowing not-for-profits to have the tools to help young people to be really strong, because it's so easy, isn't it? You can get offered drugs anywhere. It's just unbelievably accessible, which I find horrific. And I think if young people aren't resilient, and if they can't find their way, and if they don't have a supportive network, which you are providing, it's very hard for them. So what is happening out there? 1 in 4 young people, are having mental health issues. I don't know how many of you have, 1 in 4. That's such a high number. I don't know how many of you have grandchildren, daughters, but it's happening to so many, and yet the government is spending 1% of its, mental health budget, and that's just its mental health budget, on prevention. So why, you're an expert, so why is prevention so important? Well,
clearly we have to interrupt these cycles somewhere. And as I mentioned earlier, I started my career right at the kind of the end of the line, the bottom end, where people end up and can't really find a way out of there. And I know future generations investing heavily in broad scale prevention.
Yeah.
And there's a real need for that to change these really, really big numbers. At the other end of that spectrum is the kind of work we do, which is indicated or targeted intervention, where we're going, okay, with these kind of big numbers and the downstream effects of young people growing up and becoming involved in criminal activities, becoming involved in addiction and so forth, we're needing to interrupt those cycles really strongly. And so very much sort of focused on picking out those young people who are most likely to end up in the worst places and getting the help to them that just otherwise isn't getting there. And why is this such a big problem? That's a massive discussion. And we're aware of social media and the impacts of that on young people. That's one part of it. But my stance, and I've been 25 years in the sector now and studying for longer than that, my stance is that we have these intergenerational cycles. We've all of us have actually come from some level of trauma. His war in the past, the history of our country in particular, and I guess the people who are suffering the most have been raised in particularly difficult circumstances, and there's a perpetuation that happens, and the only way we're going to change that is by interrupting that. And I guess that's what gives me hope that we're able to do that.
So we have $1 billion under management, and so in the last year we've invested $5 million in 40 not-for-profits, which are about mental health prevention. And so we've measured that, just like we measure the fund managers. We've measured our impact on the social side with Future Generation Global, and we've reached 5.3 million young people with 5 million. That has made a direct impact into their lives. So for me, the more that we can prove that what we do works, the more government will listen. So all of you that are future generation, you're sort of helping us, influence the government, hopefully, as well, to fund all of these organizations. But they can't do it alone. We know that. There's limited budget. But I'm going to end there because I know lunch is outside. But we are going to be around afterwards. But are there any questions? Or is lunch the lure? All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you very much for listening. And talk outside.